7th and 8th grade. You can see the fruits of my weekend project behind me. My brother-in-law and sister helped me build a bookcase, and I'm super excited about it. You know how much I love books, so I'm really excited to have a giant bookshelf that will hold all the books I could ever want. Probably not all the books I could ever want, but at least more than my small shelf before held. Anyways, yesterday we talked about the Battle of Iwo Jima and the fact that the U.S. needed Iwo Jima because it was close enough that they wouldn't have to refuel their planes on the way to and from Japan. But Iwo Jima wasn't enough. They needed another larger island for a true staging ground for the invasion of Japan. So the U.S. managed to get control of Iwo Jima by the end of March 1945, and the plan for Okinawa, the next step in the process, was already in the works. So on April 1st, the U.S. military invaded the island of Okinawa in the Pacific Ocean. I've included a map. You can see that Okinawa is a little bit to the west of Iwo Jima, but it's just as close to the Japanese mainland. Okinawa is remembered as the bloodiest battle of the Pacific theater. More than 12,000 Allied troops died in the fight to take Okinawa, and more than 110,000 Japanese troops were killed, and 100,000 estimated civilians were killed, or they were ordered to commit suicide by the Japanese military rather than submit to the U.S. troops. You remember yesterday I told you how fierce the Japanese were. They had a philosophy that they would never admit defeat and never surrender. Okinawa started on April 1st and it continued for nearly 3 months. The Japanese were so well dug in and determined not to give up, so they fought until they were nearly all dead, just like Iwo Jima. And the U.S. and the Allies knew that that was probably gonna be the case, and they were gonna have to fight just as hard as they did in Iwo Jima, if not harder, because Okinawa was much larger. In the midst of the fighting in Okinawa, victory in Europe was declared on May 8th. Tate actually has a newspaper from May 7th. I'm going to show you a picture of that. Isn't that so cool? He sent that to me to say that was the most random thing that he had in his room, but that's a really cool random thing to have in your room, don't you think? Victory was declared on May 8th in Europe, but fighting was still happening in the Pacific theater. It was not nearly finished yet. But now that the Allies had won in Europe, they were able to turn all of their attention to the Pacific front. On May 25th, there were still no signs of the Japanese giving up. So the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, those are the military leaders, the top military leaders in the United States, the Joint Chiefs of Staff approved Operation Downfall. This was the invasion of Japan, and they tentatively scheduled it for November 1st, 1945. So they had about 6 months to put this plan into action. Over the course of the next few months, several different Japanese leaders made statements declaring that Japan would never give up and never surrender. They would fight till the very end. On June 21st, after nearly 3 months of the fiercest fighting of World War II, Okinawa was finally controlled by the Allies, by the U.S. Remember that Japan was so far away from any other area that was controlled by the U.S. that they hadn't been able to have bombing raids on Japan itself to the degree that they needed to for Operation Downfall, for the invasion of Japan. Now that they had Iwo Jima and Okinawa, they were able to start bombing on Japan itself, and that happened on July 10th. 4 days later, on July 14th, the Navy moved in and began a naval bombardment. So they were bombing from the ships and from the air. Throughout the war, there had been a project going on to develop an atomic bomb, and it was developed because the Allies thought that the Germans were also trying to develop their own atomic bomb, and they were, but the Germans were so spread thin that they weren't able to successfully create one. The US, in conjunction with the Allies in Britain, were able to create this project. It was called the Manhattan Project. And the scientists on the Manhattan Project had finally created a successful atomic bomb. So now President Harry Truman had another choice to make. They could go through with the plan to invade Japan, or they could drop an atomic bomb. What you have to understand about the decision that Harry Truman had to make is that the Japanese were known for never surrendering. We've already talked about several of their leaders actually standing up and saying, "We will never surrender. We will fight to the death." Every civilian and every person in the Japanese military was committed to that. And while we had created Operation Downfall, the Japanese had their own plan to defend their islands. They had 4 million available troops, but they only had equipment for 1 million of those troops. So their plan was to send them to the southernmost tip of Japan to defend against the coming US and Allied invasion. They were going to send those 1 million well-equipped troops. The rest of the troops, along with over 31 million civilians who were conscripted into the military. If you were a man between the ages of 16 and 60, you were forced into the military. If you were a woman between the ages of 17 and 40, you were also forced into the military. But do you remember what I said, that they didn't have enough equipment for everyone? So they were given weapons like swords, and some were even planning to use bamboo spears. That's how desperate they were and how determined the Japanese were to never give up and never stop fighting. So with all of that information, the US, 10 days after their first successful test of an atomic bomb, sent the parts for the atomic bomb known as Little Boy. That's what they named it. They sent those parts to the Pacific with the plan to drop them on a Japanese city. On August 6th, 1945, that's exactly what they did. The US dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The Japanese continued fighting, so on August 9th, the US dropped a second atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Nagasaki. In total, it's estimated that 146,000 people were killed. Some numbers have it as high as 250,000, and the devastation from these bombs was terrible. Realizing they could never compete with atomic warfare, the Japanese surrendered on August 14th, 1945. Even though Emperor Hirohito announced the surrender on August 15th, it wasn't officially Victory in Japan Day until September 2nd, 1945, when the US met with the Japanese representatives on the US battleship Missouri to sign the official surrender documents. There are a lot of other details, a lot of other things that took place. I gave you the highlight reel. If you're interested in this and you want to watch some more videos about it, I've included a video about the atomic bomb being dropped on Hiroshima, the one on Nagasaki, and the planned invasion that never actually happened, Operation Downfall. So if you're interested, you can watch those. They've got a lot of great information. If you haven't finished your World War II research paper yet, go ahead and do that and send me a picture. I'd love to see what you've learned. World War II is so broad and so huge. You can study it for your entire life and still learn new things all the time. So keep researching and let me know if you find any interesting facts that you didn't hear me talk about and you think I might not know. I'd love to learn about it.